Great to see everyone. Almost see, more like read in the chat where you're from. We're really excited to be here. I am Laura Brynas, the Managing Director at Big Spaceship. A couple of years ago, Insight Partners reached out to us to explore just starting a relationship, and it was a really fruitful, great set of conversations. And last year, they reached out again to introduce us to Lightricks. So we are here today to share our experience working together and the kind of amazing working relationship and the work that we produced over the past almost 12 months. So we are calling this talk Demystifying the Rebranding Process. We're going to go deep into that topic. And the representatives from Big Spaceship, besides myself, I'm going to turn over to Stacy to introduce herself, and then we will go down the rest of the slide.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So my name is Stacy Zimmerman, and I lead our account management discipline at Big Spaceship.
Great. I'll go next. Hi, and I'll turn my video on. Hi, I'm Sarah Maisel. Really great to meet everybody. I'm Group Strategy and Research Director at Big Spaceship. I'll be walking you through most of this presentation and really looking forward to hearing your questions afterwards. And then from there, I'll pass it on to Sam. She's on the line. And if not, we can turn it over to the Lightricks team.
Hi everyone, I'm Amir. I'm the CMO and one of the co-founders of Lightricks. I'm excited to be here today, and I'll turn it to Ido.
Hi everyone, my name is Ido and I spearhead the global communication, and I sit right next to Nir. That's why you heard me at the same time. Yeah, working closely with the Big Spaceship team. Looking forward to meeting you all and hearing your questions today.
And then 30 seconds on who Big Spaceship is, why are we sitting here, what's the background. So we are a strategically led creative agency. So what that means is that we do everything from brand consulting all the way to deep creative expertise in production, whether that is for your brand, for campaigns, for your product, so websites, apps, kind of everything in between. We are small, we're nimble, we are very quick to make impact on businesses, which is why we are happy to share this work with you, because you're all in a very special time in your life cycle. We were founded in 2000 in Brooklyn. However, we are distributed now, probably like most other people on the line, fully embracing the in COVID, post-COVID new world. So we are pretty excited to be here, like I've already said. And if you have any questions, throw them our way, challenge us. We really like a good debate. So we are excited to jump in, and Sarah is going to take over.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Right, so we wanted to start off this presentation with a somewhat existential question. So what does brand mean? It turns out brand has a lot of different definitions. This is literally screenshots that I pulled from doing like a 5-minute Google search. This is a big reason why a lot of organizations, especially organizations who don't necessarily prioritize brand, feel like the branding process or the rebranding process can feel really overwhelming, daunting, and even confusing. So we wanted to start really quickly and just align on a very simple definition of brand that we can kind of keep in mind as we go through this presentation, which is that brand at its core is really about meaning. It's about giving your business and imbuing your business with a sense of meaning. So just to kind of set some context, your brand should be able to answer a few really simple key questions. So why do you exist beyond profit? Who should care? What's the audience that's really going to rally around your brand, your meaning? And what is that higher order need that you're solving, that your business is solving, that isn't necessarily just trend-based? So, I think we all know these examples all too well, that when brand doesn't really deliver on that meaning, it can lead to a lot of mishaps. It can lead to distrust. It can lead to implosion. It can be very doom and gloom. We're seeing this kind of play out live right now with Facebook. When Facebook was first really started, their whole brand was really about connection, but as we've all kind of like witnessed in the last 5 years, they've kind of lost sight of that brand meaning. And it's led to not just distrust with consumers, but also even with their own employees. Same thing with Quibi, a little bit of a different example. Quibi, their whole brand was really kind of focused on this notion that long form content was dead, that short form content was kind of the wave of the future. If you look at any media consumption trends, you can kind of definitely see that on the rise. But then this once in a lifetime event happened in the last year called COVID, which I'm sure we're all too familiar with now, that really made that whole brand meaning, their whole purpose kind of irrelevant. Just something that's really important to note is this idea that brands are not stagnant. Brands need to live and breathe. They're living entities. They're parts of our identity that we really need to make sure we're evolving and pushing to ensure that whatever our brand meaning is reflective of what's happening within broader culture, but also what's happening within the business as well. And Victoria's Secret is such a great example of that. It's probably a little bit too early to tell whether or not this rebrand is going to really do anything for their business. And some might say it's too late, but it's a really interesting example of a brand that had this reckoning that in order to survive and kind of continue being this legacy brand, they needed to really reevaluate what their brand meaning was and what they could stand for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, who's going to talk a little bit more about our partnership with Lightricks.
Great. So with any type of daunting task of relationship, we wanted to talk a little bit about where do we begin? How did this all start? So wanted to begin with our partnership with Lightricks. So when we first partnered with the team, you'll hear from them a bit today. They're an incredibly passionate group of founders, and they'd achieved some incredible success developing some of these photo and video apps for mobile. But as they started to grow, what was happening was that the team, Sarah, I think it's not advancing. The team had really focused on scaling the 10 plus apps, but without a brand guiding that strategy and that ecosystem. So you can think of lots of other companies where you've kind of built from the ground up and then said, okay, wait a second, let's pull back and say, what does this all mean together? How is it all working together as an ecosystem that's got some cohesiveness and focus? So in chatting with the team, they came to Big Spaceship to build that brand. They recognized the need for that unifying, consistent narrative for future growth. And we proved that the brand has so much more power than just that. It was just the beginning. We love when teams come to us with a brief of, hey, we think we need. And then as we start to get under the hood and get into the work together, we realize what we really, really need to do and aligning that whole organization towards one purpose. So as we started to get into the work, and Sarah's going to talk a little bit about how we did, what our tactics have sort of been. But as we've been immersing ourselves in the business, we unearthed a few big obstacles that we needed to overcome together. So first was around, those individual products. The Lightricks team has a really, really sophisticated team that built a process around acquisition. But what we realized is that we need to do both acquisition and brand marketing to get those higher value users into the ecosystem and really keep them there via retention strategies. Second was that formalizing culture felt a little bit corporate for Lightricks. And what we mean by corporate is, well, we don't really need a set of rules. We don't need to know how to operate. But what we uncovered together is that that culture and having a set of brand values can provide a compass, not a strict set of guidelines, but it can help you guide as the business scales and grows to bring more people into the fold and help give a unifying structure for your internal teams. And then lastly, that there was difficulty articulating what the business is and how it was differentiated in this saturated market. So Lightricks team and us, we chatted about how we didn't realize how much not having a brand could actually impact the actual business side of Lightricks beyond brand. And Nir, if there's anything you'd like to add to this slide, we'd love to hear that now.
Yeah, for sure. So as it was mentioned, we had a set of individual tools. We are known as a developer of several content creation tools such as Facetune, Videolip, and Photolip, and we started as a bootstrap company, and from day one we were really focused on user acquisition and ROI and all that stuff, and didn't invest much in branding. And at some point we realized that we just had, if we want to take it to the next step, we had to do more, and we started looking for the right partner. And part of the issue was that, yeah, it did feel a bit corporate for us, for some of the people here. We had some attempts before for branding processes that people were very cynical about the process. And for that, I think it's really important to choose the right partner for that. And Big Spaceship turned out to be great partners, and they helped us through lots of conversations to understand that there is an extra value in branding, and it can really help us, and that there will be no brand police that will arrest us if we ever try something else, but it is some kind of guidance that will really help us to understand where we want to go and how we communicate it. So that was very helpful for us.
Cool. So, a part of our process in really working with Lightricks was making sure that we were an extension of their team. And we took a really collaborative phased approach to make sure that they were with us every step along the way in our journey of kind of figuring out the Lightricks brand. And our whole approach was about understanding the business from the inside out. So we started by doing a whole materials review or an audit where we organized over 100 internal documents to really figure out kind of like what was the lay of the land and the playing field that we were entering into. From there, we did stakeholder interviews. So we conducted almost 50 interviews with everyone from employees to partners to even investors to really understand like what was happening beneath the hood at Lightricks, what was really going on, and what were the experiences that people were kind of going through that could lend themselves to us getting a better understanding of the brand and the business. And then from there, we moved into beacon brand analysis. So we looked at over 10 different aspirational brands. These weren't necessarily direct competitors, but brands that really have stood out in terms of being powerful brands that we kind of all know and love. And we looked at kind of the unifying factors that made those brands really famous and what contributed to their success, so we could take those factors and apply them to Lightricks. And then lastly, we did a cultural white space and audience research to figure out like what was that key strategic territory that Lightricks could own. And to do that, we triangulated research from a bunch of different sources, from desk research to social listening. We conducted our own user interviews. We also used a Big Spaceship's proprietary Gen Z panel called Big Spaceship Reveal, to really understand kind of how we could position Lightricks in a unique light. Something that was really important for us to keep in mind is that Lightricks is extremely data-driven. I'm sure a lot of you can empathize with that feeling of really being a data-driven organization. And a lot of brand strategy work can feel a little bit fluffy. I'm sure, hopefully we'll dispel a lot of that in this presentation. But it was important for us to come up with frameworks that really took a lot of the qualitative research that goes into brand strategy work and add rigor to them and make it really feel actionable for Lightricks. So, for example, when we did our stakeholder interviews, we didn't just go out and talk to close to 50 employees. We had a really set methodology that we used to do that. So when we conducted stakeholder interviews, we already had a list of questions that we wanted to answer across 3 different big themes. And we asked those questions to every person that we talked to. And we ended up synthesizing all of that research into this rubric to really understand where Lightricks kind of had started, where it is right now, and where it needed to go, figuring out those big opportunities for Lightricks that we could help them kind of realize. And same with our beacon brand analysis. We didn't just kind of go out and start researching different aspirational brands. We researched brands across 3 different categories, brands that had successfully become parent brands like the Peacocks of the world, more purpose-led brands, and then culturally driven brands. We looked at the key factors that really contributed to those brands' success, and we ended up creating a scorecard or a grading rubric that we ended up using to score Lightricks against these key factors and show really where the gaps were that we could help resolve. And all of that research, all those 4 steps really culminated in this bigger brand architecture that helped us organize all the different brand dimensions of Lightricks. So I'm going to go through each of these layers in more detail, but the key thing to remember and keep in mind as we're going through this presentation is that each of these layers really played such a critical role in establishing that meaning for Lightricks brand. And again, brand equals meaning. And not only did it help us establish meaning, but it also addressed these core business needs for Lightricks as an organization. And what's really great about this architecture, as you can see on the left, each of these different layers, there was a distinct purpose that each of these layers had. So the Hedgehog, which we're about to review, wasn't really even about the brand. It was really about the business, and it was a way for us to help leadership make better decisions based on what the articulation of the business could be. As we go further down, the brand platform is really where we start talking to consumers. Like, this is our creative expression of all of our strategy. So we'll go through each layer and you'll see kind of the different roles that each of these layers has in adding that meaning and establishing that meaning for Lightricks. So to start, we're going to talk through the hedgehog. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this concept, but the first thing that we really needed to do was bring a sense of focus to the business. And so something that we found in talking to our stakeholders was this idea that people had a really hard time defining the singular business proposition for Lightricks, and really like what the world would lose if one day people woke up and Lightricks apps had disappeared from their phone. So this is pulled directly from our stakeholder interviews. You know, I feel like the problem is that Lightricks is in its adolescence, where we're asking ourselves who we are. What is our business? What is it that we do? We end up not deciding who we are. It makes it hard to be distinctive, stand out, and project an image. So we took inspiration from Jim Collins, who is a business management expert and author. Some of you may know him. He's written tons of books, including a book called Beyond Entrepreneurship, which apparently is something that Reid Hoffman reads every year. We looked at his book called Good to Great. This is an academic research study that he conducted at UC Boulder, where he looked at companies that were able to beat the general stock market by an average of 7 times consecutively over the course of 15 years. And he looked at kind of the key traits that each of those companies had to figure out how companies, like your companies, for example, can make this transition from performing well to performing above average, that making that transition from good to great. And one of the traits that he identified was this concept called the hedgehog. And on the left, the concept of the hedgehog comes from this Greek fable, and I'll read this quote on the left just so we can all kind of ground ourselves in it. It's this idea that the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And I'll read this quote from Jim Collins just so we get a little better sense of what this concept is all about. So those who built the good to great companies were, to one degree or another, hedgehogs. They use our hedgehog nature to drive toward what we come to call a hedgehog concept for their companies. Those who led the comparison companies tended to be foxes, never gaining the clarifying advantage of a hedgehog concept, being instead scattered, diffused, and inconsistent. So again, the hedgehog knows one thing and uses that one thing to guide everything that their business does. So there are 3 circles that are part of the hedgehog concept. What are you deeply passionate about? What drives your economic engine? And what you can be the best at in the world. We spent a lot of time at the beginning of this engagement and partnership, like really trying to figure out and gain consensus around these 3 circles. What are you deeply passionate about and what drives your economic engine? These were fairly easy questions for us to answer. They're fairly easy, I think, for any leader to answer as well. What's really challenging is that last question, what you can be the best at in the world. And what's really interesting, Jim Collins talks about this in the book, is that answering this question can be really grueling. It can be really frustrating because it's hard for everyone to align on answering that question. But once you kind of arrive at the answer, it's so simple and easy, and it makes so much sense. And it's kind of this eureka moment for everybody within the leadership team. And that's exactly what our experience was like with Lightricks as well. And to kind of talk through a real world example, you know, Tesla is a brand that we hear a lot about whenever we talk to leaders or to founders. It's a brand that we all kind of look up to and admire. And Tesla is a real world example of a hedgehog company. This is actually taken from 2006 on the left. This is what Elon Musk referred to as his master plan that he published almost 15 years ago, that he sent to all of his shareholders. And what's so fascinating about it is it's so insanely simple, and it's still core to what their business is today. So his master plan, I'll read the bullets below, is to build sports cars, use that money to build an affordable car, use that money to build an even more affordable car, while doing above also provide zero emission electric power generation options. If you look on the right, you can see how that master plan got translated into a mission statement from 2013 that's still on the website today and is still exactly what they're doing. They have this maniacal focus on being the best at creating sustainable transport. So our goal when we created Tesla a decade ago was the same as it is today, to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport transport by bringing compelling mass market electric cars to market as soon as possible. So once we aligned on the Hedgehog, and again, the Hedgehog is this really simple articulation of the business that helps differentiate us and also guide our decision-making. This is when we could start thinking bigger picture about our brand vision. This is a long-term view of the company and the timeless impact we want to make. So when we were talking to employees, we found that a lot of them really had a hard time understanding what they were working toward beyond short-term goals. They're really looking for this higher order purpose that would inspire the business and also bring kind of a sense of emotion to it as well. So this quote on the right, we need a vision that underlies the decisions. Decisions can't be sporadic. This is a company that grew from the ground up with lots of different products. We need a unifying sense. The way Nike stands for achievement, we need that thing. Well, not surprisingly, Nike was one of the brands that we looked at in our Beacon brand analysis. And what we found when we looked within kind of these more purpose-led organizations is that a lot of them have these well-established purposes that they stand by, even when they're not necessarily popular or they feel controversial. And not only do they stand by them, but they understand that there's ROI in standing by those purposes. I think we all we remember this like really arresting visual of the Colin Kaepernick campaign. And this is actually a slide we pulled from that Beacon brand analysis where we showed how this campaign, Dream Crazy, it was this purpose that they had to stand by Colin Kaepernick and obviously going directly up against the NFL, which is one of Nike's big partners. When they published that campaign or when they launched that campaign, their stocks dropped 4%. They were boycotted on Twitter. But shortly after that, there was a big jump in stock prices. It rose over 18%. And it just goes to show that when you have this purpose, that you stand by it and you maintain it, even if it's not something that is totally mainstream or feels a little bit controversial, it really can help pay off in the long term and really set your brand apart. So this is a quote from Phil Knight, the co-founder and CEO of Nike. It doesn't matter how many people hate your brand as long as you have enough people to love it. And as long as you have that attitude, you can't be afraid of offending people. You have to take a stand on something, which is ultimately why I think the Kaepernick ad worked. Something else that we found in our Beacon brand analysis was that all of these Beacon brands that we looked at, they all started with a very, very simple value proposition. And we'll look at Lego as an example. Like when Lego was founded, it was very simply a toy company that was focused on building blocks. But in 1955, like all these other companies, they realized that there was something bigger that they could kind of hitch their wagon to. And they started realizing that, they had this bigger ambition to not just be about toys, but to be about this idea of play and the power of play. So their vision is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. In 1932, when Lego was founded, there's no way that anyone could have probably predicted the internet would have been a thing. But because they had this timeless vision set forward, they had a way to navigate these really crazy seismic shifts that were happening within culture, within the economy, to continue to stay relevant and expand on their core. They use their vision as almost like the strategic wrapper that would help them differentiate the way that they show up to things like the internet, for example. So they are continuing to really connect with audience because they stand for something so timeless. And we had to do that same exact exercise with Lightricks. So once we kind of had that vision in motion, what we really needed to figure out were the brand values. And brand values are these core brand beliefs to help guide not just your internal behaviors as an organization, but also the way that you talk to consumers and what your relationships with consumers are. And all of these values, the whole goal of them is to help you realize the vision. So everything should be laddering up to that vision. So, we knew really quickly early on that Lightricks was a really special company. Everyone we talked to really loved working there. There was a lot of unwritten values and these cultural tenets that people were really excited about when they joined, but a lot of those things were getting diluted because the company was just growing at such a fast rate. So this quote on the right, it's become more of a corporate kind of place. With growth comes other things. So we know from, again, the Beacon brands that we looked at that a lot of them have these really well-established values that not just are there to help kind of reinforce what's going on within their culture in the organization, but really helps elevate their business and also differentiates their business. It makes their businesses stand out. Airbnb, Adobe, and Patagonia do really good jobs of this. Airbnb and Adobe, they actually use a lot of their values to help create even new products, and they see that as a way that they can use their values to figure out new ideas and figure out how to better connect with their external audiences. And Patagonia has this really rich set of values that they use for recruiting purposes as well. They're using their values to make sure that they're bringing in the right people, and they're famous for that. So what we ended up doing with the Lightricks team, and this took a lot of time, was to really kind of figure out and brainstorm what were those key cultural themes that we were hearing from employees, but also things that we observed throughout our own partnership with them. So these are just 4 examples of the themes that we heard. Fun, obviously, you know, everyone at Lightricks really loves the fun culture there. We were sent footage of a party that Lightricks had a while back, and that footage definitely corroborated just how fun the culture is there and how much of a priority that is for the leadership team. There's also a big culture of debate. This has been one of the best parts of our partnership. When we go to meetings with the Lightricks team, we know that everyone's going to voice their opinion and be open to hearing other opinions as well. That's not just something that we observed within our partnership, but it's also something that employees brought up as well as being a way that they're pushing the work. And then there's also this people-centric culture. Every time we ask people their favorite part about Lightricks, they all mention their coworkers. And then lastly, this idea of being impact-oriented. People love the fact that they could still walk into the leadership team's offices and pitch an idea and then go off and run with it. And so ultimately what we did is we took those themes and we started translating them into more actionable values for the organization. And those values, again, they were already a part of the culture, but had never truly been formalized. And so you can see under each of these different themes, we created a value and then added definition to that value as well. So fun became create fun. Culture of debate became strong convictions loosely held. People-centric culture became invest in people. And then impact-oriented became Rosh Gadol, which in Hebrew literally translates to being big-headed. And it's this idea that, you know, you can have an idea, but you're not just executing the idea, you're really thinking of the bigger picture and the bigger impact you can make. For each of these values, we also outlined the key internal behaviors and external behaviors that laddered back into these values to make sure that the whole organization was really clear on what these values looked like in the real world and how we could adhere to them moving forward. So then lastly, after we created those values, we got into the positioning statement and the brand platform. The positioning statement, this is really how you're differentiating your brand within the marketplace. It's the unique position that you can own, and your brand platform is really the distillation of that positioning statement. It's this creative line that brings everything to life. So something that we learned from our stakeholder interviews was that a lot of people had a hard time telling us what Lightricks' true competitive and emotional advantage is within the category. They're in crazy, crazy competitive categories like a lot of you are. And we needed to figure out what was that emotional hook that we could draw users into and also employees to make sure that we were setting ourselves apart. So I'll read the highlights of this quote really quickly. We're lacking emotion. We want our users to keep using our apps and create an emotional attachment to our apps. If you don't have a clear story, it prevents you from connecting with users, improving retention, and eventually the bottom line. So we created this framework. Again, we know brand strategy can feel a little bit fluffy, but we really wanted to put a little bit more rigor into how we were thinking about this positioning statement. And this is something that really any brand can use. So to us, there are these 3 core ingredients that make up an effective positioning statement. It's audience, it's competitors, and it's brand. And these are the 3 questions that kind of ladder into those strategic pillars. So what is an unsolved need or pain point that our audience is experiencing in the creator community that's specific to Lightricks? Competitors, how are other brands in the landscape addressing this pain point or unmet need? And then lastly, for brand, how are we uniquely positioned to offer a solution to unmet needs for our audience? And so going back to our beacon brands, we noticed that when we looked at their positioning statements, they all kind of use that same formula to develop their positioning statements. So we'll go back to Nike. For their audience, it's this idea that people really struggle to see themselves as athletes in quotes, and they're looking for like a more inclusive way to kind of think of themselves as being in that athletic mindset. For competitors, it's this idea that a lot of other brands within the category, they're really leading with performance, or they're aligning their products with more professional athletes, but they're not necessarily existing for the everyday athlete. And then lastly, for brand, it's this core brand belief that Nike believes that if you have a body, no matter how much you've done sports in the past, like if you are able to walk, you are an athlete. If you're able to move, you are an athlete. So because they followed kind of this formula and used this strategy, they've been able to carve out these really unique territories for themselves in each of their categories. So Nike, just kind of going back through kind of the distilled version of those 3 strategic pillars. For audiences, about inclusions. Competitors, nobody's like really tapping into that resilience mindset. And brand is this idea that Nike exists for everyone. It's a brand about possibilities. So their positioning from there is we serve all types of athletes who want clothing that offers performance and comfort while standing for something more. We ensure our customers feel like they're a part of something bigger. So you can see from their brand platform, I think we all know this line, everyone is an athlete, but it didn't just come from thin air. They looked at their positioning statement and took the key facets of that positioning statement to distill it into the singular message that can really live across our entire brand ecosystem, everything from how they are talking about themselves internally to even consumer facing message. So with Nike, they pulled these different pieces of their positioning, like they serve all types of athletes, they're standing for something more. They're looking for people who are want to feel a part of something bigger. And that leads itself to everyone is an athlete. And also, if you can remember from that vision section, really ties nicely into that Colin Kaepernick ad as well. So everything's super connected. So in sum, this is the final brand architecture and framework that we use to work with Lightricks. And something to keep in mind, again, like brand is not this stagnant entity. It's something that we've continued to go back to and refine over time as things change and evolve within the Lightricks business. And at the same time, it's been this really valuable, crucial anchoring point. It's guiding everything that we do as a brand. It's helping us reposition products. It's helping us figure out new service layers that we want to add in. And it's also making us think more big picture about the bigger value we can add to creators and their worlds. And then the last thing that we wanted to address really quickly is just our relationship. Obviously, having an external partner and hiring another partner is a really big step to take. But these relationships can be really successful. Our relationship has been just really rewarding. This has been truly one of the most fulfilling projects I've ever worked on. And a lot of that is because of these 3 different kind of factors that have really contributed to our relationship, and things that you should also look for if you're looking for an agency to help you rebrand or brand. The first is this idea that there's a real willingness to challenge and be challenged with Lightricks. So kind of going back to that value that we uncovered around the culture of debate, we've gotten into some not heated discussions, but definitely vocal discussions around, how to move forward and what are the right kind of strategic recommendations. And it's really helped create this amazing relationship, but also made the work just so much better. There's a real commitment to and respect for rigor research and data. We take a lot of pride at Big Spaceship in really understanding culture and behavior and doing that research to come up with strategic recommendations for our partners. And Lightricks was just so open to understanding the full kind of landscape of the research that we're able to come up with and putting that rigor around it. And then lastly, this idea that really being able to recognize when change is needed. This is something that can be really hard for founders and for leaders. Lightricks knew that, they needed to make a change if they wanted to move the business forward, and they knew that they needed a partner to help them realize that. And it really created this amazing partnership between us. And I'll turn it over to Nir in case he has anything else to add.
Yeah, I think you summarized it pretty well. The way we see it is we don't see Big Spaceship as an agency. We see them as another team, as an extension of the company. And whenever we make a strategic decision or an important decision, we often hear in the room the question, what do Big Spaceship people think about this? And then we ask and take this opinion into account. We are very happy that they say their opinion when needed and aren't shy with that. Just yesterday, we had a discussion about another direction that we want to take, a product, and they raised their concerns about, do we have it tightly coupled with the master brand, and do we need to rethink some things? And we really appreciate that. I think it's part of what making this work, and we're really happy that we're working together.
Great. All right. So yeah, we can open the floor to questions, and thank you all so much for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah and Nir. Do we have any questions? Now is the time to ask them. So if you could kindly enter those questions in the Q&A module. We'll wait a few seconds just to let those come in. And while we're doing that, I just want to mention too, as a reminder, that we will be sharing a recording of this amazing event by email later today. It should be posted on our blog and contain a few additional resources. So we have a question that asks, what is the timeline for engagement?
Yeah. Stacey, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, totally. I think it depends a little bit around what your goals are and what you're working towards. You know, if there is a product launch, is there a timeline? You know, as Sarah mentioned, we like to really spend some good time doing research, talking to your company, getting our stakeholder interviews together. So that does take a couple of weeks immersion in the beginning just to lay the foundation. But there's not really a set rules. There's a bunch of guidelines and tools that we use to determine these types of projects, but it's not like there's a hard and fast, oh, it must be 6 or 9 months. It's kind of whatever you need.
Very insightful. Thanks for that. So I'll just leave a few more seconds. Otherwise, you all get a few more minutes back in your day, which is the greatest gift of all.
I'm reading the question now too, specifically, what was the timeline for this engagement? I think what's been really interesting, along the lines of what Nir and Sarah both said, this isn't necessarily a project with a end date, right? There's no, okay, we've done it. It's really been a relationship that we've helped and partnered with the team to help builds their brand. And then, as Nir mentioned, there's a lot of decisions happening all the time. And so we're working together and consulting to see, what do we need to do to fit that into our master plan, or do we need to pivot?
That's really helpful. Thank you. So with that, I will give everyone some time back in their day. Thank you so much, Big Spaceship and Lightricks team, for sharing your insights with our community today. As I said before, we'll share a recording of this event by email later today, and hope to see you all at the next event. Have a great day.
Thank you.